Hi everybody, Bentley Compost Guy Christy here again, and this is update number 2 in my new Worm In Mega project. Just to kind of quickly recap, I have found my old Worm In Mega in my shed, and I have set it up once again down in my basement bathroom. I'm not 100% sure if it'll stay here, but I am going to try to make sure that it at least is allowed to stay inside somewhere in the basement. Now, again, the screen lid was chewed up by mice, so this is going to be a bit interesting. Normally that would be a zippered screen lid, which is just about the most amazing feature of the Worm In. And so it's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to try to fix it at some point, but initially all I'm going to do is basically put some kind of cover, something like a garbage bag or something like that, over top of the composting zone, and hopefully that works okay. Now, interestingly enough, this always seems to happen to me. I'm in the middle of a pretty bad infestation of gnats and flies. I brought in some material from an outdoor bed that included some pumpkin waste and stuff like that, and put it into my Worm Bin 48. And unfortunately, there's this huge outhatching of gnats and flies. So I have to be very, very careful, especially now that I don't have this screen lid. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later in the video. Now, the one thing that is sort of different about this project, I have chosen to use a somewhat different bedding material. Normally, I love to use shredded cardboard, shredded corrugated cardboard especially, but also shredded drink tray cardboard. Nice and bulky, nice and absorbent. The worms love them. Those are excellent bedding materials. This time I'm doing something a little bit different. I don't necessarily recommend this for those of you who are watching, so please keep that in mind. But I've decided to try scrunched up office paper, essentially, or scrunched up paper in general. There's different kinds of paper in there. I happen to have a lot of this waste. I write little notes for myself, and envelopes. I rip out the plastic windows and scrunch them up. And I kind of thought to myself, how will this compare to my normal bedding, but even to something like shredded paper? I've used shredded paper before. I have a shredder, cross-cut shredder, and it works reasonably well. It does get kind of clogged up fairly quickly, but the stuff that's coming out is really, really nice. Part of the problem, though, is that it takes time, for one thing, and it also tends to mat down. Anyone who has used paper, shredded paper, probably will know that it tends to get matted down, and that's not what we want. We want to have good airflow, so it's important to at least have something that's fairly bulky. So I'm thinking that this may work. We'll see. It's scrunched up, but once it gets wet, it does tend to kind of spread out a little bit. The other thing you may be wondering about is all those sort of chemicals and whatever. I did soak and drain this stuff that you're seeing in front of you, and that is a consideration. That's why I probably wouldn't recommend it for those of you, especially if you're just getting started. I think I'll be fine. I think I'll do just fine, just because the biology, the microbiology, tends to have some pretty amazing properties and tends to be able to handle stuff like this, so I don't see any issues. I've used paper plenty of times before, usually as a sort of secondary bedding, but I don't normally recommend people start a vermicomposting system solely with white paper, just because there can be bleaches in the paper, other chemicals. It may irritate the worms, and it may not be something you want to have in your vermicompost. So anyway, so that's pretty much it. Now, first of all, we have our setup process. Those of you who have watched some of my past videos about Worm Ins will probably be pretty familiar with how I set things up, but it's always good to kind of review. The first thing that I do is I like to, you can see down here is where the toggles are. You're more than welcome to just kind of tighten the toggles really well and leave it at that. I like to do an actual added knot tying. I wrap the string, the cord sort of around and around and around, and then I tie it up nice and tight. Jerry, the owner of the Worm In brand, just kind of teases me about it. He calls it my hillbilly hitch.
he doesn't feel that it's necessary, and he's probably right. But it's just sort of an extra measure. Kind of helps to prevent worms from getting out, or whatever. It's just sort of a thing that I like to do. So that's sort of my step one, once the worm in has been attached to the stand. Number two is the false bottom. And you can see that I have already started the false bottom. This is sort of step one of the false bottom. And in this case, it's going to be the scrunched up paper, dry, all down on the very bottom. And over top of that, I'm going to add some newsprint, a lot of newsprint that sort of goes up the sides and creates an actual kind of bottom. And what this is sort of a physical barrier between the composting zone and the bottom, which I like to have early on, especially because the worms will be located further down in the end than once it's processing for a little while. They'll continue to move up. So I like to have that sort of bit of barrier. I like to have an extra soaking zone in case things get a little wet here and there, especially early on. It helps to soak up excess moisture. It's just kind of something that I like to do. So when you first harvest, people always wonder about this. What happens with the false bottom? First of all, they wonder, is that going to break down? The answer is usually no. This stuff you're looking at right here will probably fall right out the bottom, nice and dry. I like to keep my worm ends quite dry, and don't worry about that. That's not a concern. The newsprint will rot through, almost certainly, and once the false bottom's gone, you don't have to worry that everything's going to suddenly fall out. Vermicompost has these sort of almost glue-like substances, this microbial secretions that kind of hold everything together. It's going to form nicely to the sides of the Mega, and it's going to be like a cone down at the bottom. I'll be able to scrape it, but it's certainly not going to just fall right out. One quick mention though, if you're using African night crawlers, I've heard reports that because of the way that they process wastes and the almost pellet-like castings they produce, it can be almost like a sandy material, grainy stuff, very nice, but that may be a case where you may sort of have a bit of trouble with the castings falling out. Just something to mention, not necessarily the case, but I've heard some reports of that. Alright, so that's sort of the intro. One other thing to mention, I'm going to be using a bag of what's known as Easy Worm Mix. This is a product that I sell up here in Canada, and essentially it is red worms, cocoons, and in their habitat material. What I found over the years is that when you start a new vermicomposting system, just about the best way to do it is to take existing worm-rich material from a successful vermicomposting system and add it to the new system. This seems to work really, really well. It provides a sort of buffer zone for the worms. It's something they're used to. It has all the microbes and critters that you want to sort of introduce to the system. The worms aren't super crowded or anything like that. So this is kind of an approach that I like to take. And it's kind of a fun experiment in this case because it's just a single bag. This is a big system, and this is certainly not a pound of worms or anything like that. Lots of future potential, but right now there's probably a lot of worms in there, but there's lots of small worms. It's definitely not your typical pound of worms. So it'll be fun to see. I have every confidence it's going to work out just fine, especially because the Mega is so forgiving. But anyway, it's time to get started. Just actually going to mention the food. I am taking it very, very easy today because of this infestation that I have in the other system. I want to be very careful. I was originally planning to put some watermelon in here. Not going to do that. I have a bit of frozen kale here. And freezing is important because that helps to ensure that it doesn't have any eggs or anything in it already. And I'm just going to be putting some bits of that down at the bottom, underneath everything, and kind of taking things slowly. I don't want to get an infestation in this system, that is for sure. If the screen lid was on, I would probably throw caution to the wind and not worry about it. But because I don't have the screen lid, we got to take things carefully. Alright, so the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to get this false bottom going. And then we will resume. So I'm going to put you down for a minute. You will come back any second now, and you will see what I've done. And we are back.
you can see that I have put the newsprint in. This is basically the entirety of one small newspaper. So quite a few sheets in there to create that false bottom. One thing you may want to do is spray gently, just so it kind of flattens a bit more against the sides. I haven't worried about it. Next, I laid in a shallow layer of the wet scrunched paper. So that's sort of my base bedding, habitat bedding. And now I'm just going to put just a little bit of this stuff. I'm not going to go crazy here. Always better to err on the side of caution. If you've got a nice bedding rich system, you do not have to worry about the worms starving, especially if you're adding them like I am, this habitat mix, which has some food value in it already. So you don't need a whole lot. I just want something that's going to start to break down and offer some food value. So that's just fine. I'm going to add a bunch more of this over top. Bit of a mess here, hard to do this with one hand, but you get the idea. Maybe one more. Not overly concerned about getting this all in. You can see some of that stuff. Any of the marker and whatnot that's on the paper is sort of kid-friendly Crayola type stuff from my kids' doodles and whatnot, so it's probably totally biodegradable and fine. And that's probably fine as far as that goes. And what I would normally do, which I should mention, what I would normally do is mix moistened bedding with the worms and everything else. But I kind of want this separation for this particular one. Again, largely because of this fly infestation. So this is why I'm kind of separating everything. Because they already have this nice habitat, this living material, you might call it, I don't have to worry about them at all. They will be fine. They are going to stay up in this zone, for as long as they need to. I'm not concerned about that at all. So that's that. You can see, looking nice already. And maybe I'll add a bit more of this stuff over top, just to kind of have a cover. And I'm going to add a lot more of the dry stuff at some point. Don't happen to have any right now. And what I'm going to do, once this is all ready to go, probably get a garbage bag, put it over top, help with the moisture. Going to get this emptied out, just have it like an empty bin. It's going to go underneath, just in case we start to get some dripping down. I doubt it, based on the moisture that's in there. It's not too much moisture. If anything, I'll probably have to add some more moisture. But it's good to have a bin underneath, especially early on, just to catch any leachate and whatnot. And I often turn it into an actual vermicomposting system eventually, just in case any worms happen to fall down or whatever. Alright, so that's pretty much it. I will certainly be keeping you posted. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'll talk again soon.